to welcome everyone to our very first webinar of our mini-series. So the Student National Medical Association's Diversity Research Committee is presenting what we're calling Introduction to Research mini-series. So this is webinar 1, and over in this webinar, we'll be talking about the types of research from basic science to social science, okay? So first, I wanted to go ahead and thank you all for being here. We got quite a few people on the line. So at any given point in time, if you have any questions, I want you to put them in the chat. We have experts here who will answer those questions. But if it's urgent and you definitely want to come off mute, let me know. But otherwise, just go ahead and keep yourself on mute so that we can make sure that everybody can hear and everybody gets the information they came for. Okay. So first and foremost, I just wanted to say that Black Lives Matter. That's going to be something that in every talk I'm in, I want to make sure that I create a safe space for everyone here. It's very important to me for everyone who is in school, whether you're in school and you're taking time off, you're going to work every day. I know that there are several transgressions that are happening against people of color here, and you are still here. You're still trying to advance yourself despite everything that's going on. So I want you to know that this is a safe space. I salute you. Continue to do the work that you're doing, and that if there's any way that I or anyone else who's a part of this organization can help you, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know. So I just want to let you guys know that there is no silly question here. This is a safe space. You should feel at home here, and if we can do anything else to make you feel like that, please let us know. Okay, great. So I wanted to go over really quickly the overall goal of this mini-series. So one, we want to increase member awareness of research. No matter what level you are, we can always get better and advance more on our topics or what we know. So I'm hoping that you gain something from this. Number 2, we want to help you identify research opportunities, especially in the era of COVID-19. We know that it's not as easy as it was as finding somebody at your institution who may be doing something that you're interested in based on flyers they have posted or just getting involved. So we want to help you find those opportunities. 3, we want to provide you with tools to successfully design, execute, and present your research findings. And so we'll give you a couple of different places where you may have an opportunity to do this. And so we hope that you'll plug into this part and you'll continue to move on to other parts of the series. Okay, so quick overview. So I spoke about today. So today what we'll be covering, we'll be working on what different types of research. When you think of research, most people think like, oh, okay, bench work. This is what intro to chemistry is, or organic chemistry. So there's so much more to research than just that. And so we're hoping to explore that with our subject matter experts. And we also want to start talking about what PIs are looking for. So PI stands for Principal Investigator. So we're hoping that they'll share what they look for in students, and also what type of students may be a good fit for their particular research. So if you like to work with animals, you know, there may be a type of research for you. If you don't like to work with animals, there's something out there for you. There's research for everyone who wants to dabble in it and wants to be interested in it as well. Webinar 2 is called Mentor-Mentee Relationships, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. So we're hoping that we can walk you through this part of how to contact and seek a mentor or a principal investigator, and what type of appropriate relationships you should be looking for to make sure that you grow out of the relationship, but also that you have a tangible product at the end. As well, if you're looking for a letter of recommendation from that mentor, what kind of steps you should be thinking about as you're walking through that. The third part will be how to read an academic paper. So from perspiration to inspiration. So we all know that if you've been doing research for a while, it can be very intimidating when someone sends you home and says, okay, read this. What does that mean? What should you be trying to get from it? So we'll be helping you how to figure out how to navigate major clinical databases like PubMed, how to use that information that you read to figure out where there are gaps in the research community so that you can have a meaningful project. Or if you're trying to validate something that the community's already found, how do you do that? And so we want to walk through that. We also want to provide you an opportunity to analyze what's called a literature review. And so why that's important before you start to do any project. The second part of the fourth part, is how to write and design a research proposal. Started from the bottom, now we're here. So at this point, we're hoping that you begin to understand how to conduct a literature review, or at least understand the importance of it. And so we're hoping to give you a little bit of information about the Wilbert C. Jordan Research Forum. And so we're hoping that you'll have an opportunity to really get involved in that, to know what you need to be prepared for that, and so that you can start to get, you know, some a publication under your belt so that you either can take that into medical school with you, or that you'll have that in medical school to take to your residency. And if neither of those apply to you, then that way you can just get involved in some research to find a question interesting, or to actually work through the steps of how research works. And then lastly, webinar 5 will be how to write an abstract, the research promised land. So this idea is that hopefully by now we've talked to you enough about the Wilbur C. Jordan Research Forum, and that you'll have an opportunity to unravel the mystique around writing an abstract, to be informed about the elements that are put in the abstract that you need to have, and hopefully to make you aware of common pitfalls that people have stumbled on, and how to have resources to overcome them. So what is the Wilbur C. Jordan Research Forum? So it was introduced as a part of SNMA about 20 or so years ago, and it's an opportunity for SNMA members to really display their scientific competence and reward them for their research accomplishment. So during this, you'll have an opportunity to present completed research that you either did prior to medical school or during medical school. You'll be able to submit an abstract that will be judged. And if you're selected for this, you'll be able to prepare and display that presentation for SNMA's AMEC conference. As well, the research that'll be considered here will be divided into basic science, clinical science, social science, and obesity or health complications of obesity. So we're really hoping that by walking you through this series that you will consider putting in an abstract to this, or if you don't do that, that you'll consider putting an abstract to any of the national conferences that happen, and we'll help you try to identify what those conferences look like. We also want to put a quick plug in that if you're interested in knowing more about research, as part of the diversity research committee, would love to have you. So if you want more information, go to the Student National Medical Association.org and look for our particular group there, and you can get more information about us there. So how the series is going to work. So there are a bunch of different educational backgrounds here on this call. We have some people in medical school, some people who are graduating medical school, high school, as well as pre-med and post-bac. So we wanted to be able to level the playing field. So the first 30 minutes of every lecture, of every of the webinar series will be us walking through different topics that you should know in order so that when we get to the panel doesn't have to stop and educate anybody on what things they should know going into it. So that way we can try to get everyone's questions answered, and that it'll be really informative for you, but also so that the subject matter experts can tell you about their research a little bit more. Then the second part will be the hour that we have our panel consisting of student researchers and principal investigators. And so participants will also have an opportunity to ask the experts about their research, how they navigated, and what they were looking for mentorship. So if you had an opportunity to register for this, if you submitted questions, we were able to give those questions to our panel so that they are prepared to answer those. And so if there are any additional questions, you can put that in the chat. Great. So I want to give you an overview of the different research types. I want to give you an overview of the research methods, and then an overview of what a project plan begins to look like when you start to consider your research. And so every talk, if you're not in medical school, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to be provided with learning objectives, and I'm going to try to keep that same format. So the 3 learning objectives for today are: 1, participants will walk away with a better understanding of the different types of research to begin to search for a mentor. 2, participants will gain a good understanding of how research is conducted to aid in the development of a project. And then 3, participants will understand what type of considerations need to be taken when designing a research project or seeking a project that's already been developed by a principal investigator. Great. So let's go ahead and jump in. So with the types. So when people think of research, they think of basic research. Again, your organic chemistry, your chemistry labs of your PhD professors lecturing and droning to you about the importance of, I can't even remember because it seems like a long blur ago. And so there's so much more to research than just that. You have clinical research, which I'm particularly passionate about, which you can start to understand how a patient works, how their body works, how drugs may have an effect on their body. You have epidemiological research. You're tracking diseases. A lot of the work that you're seeing now with COVID-19 and the coronavirus has been epidemiological research. There are protocols in place to be able to track how that disease is spreading and how people are being able to do that. It's extremely cool. And so you may see what's called heat mapping or geocoding, that these maps where they have different colors of where people are, whether it's their income or whether it's type of chronic diseases they have. So you can see that over, that you can see that over a course of time and how that changes. So epidemiological research is really cool. And then as well, something that's often looked over is the social sciences. So this idea of the anthropology of medicine, the history of medicine, if you know about the Tuskegee study and how those type of things, if we've learned anything from history, is that if you don't educate yourself on it, history will repeat itself. And so learning about the history of medicine and what you really need to know as a physician going in, or the type of considerations physicians need to have in their educational training. So first, let's go over the different types of research. And when I say types of research, I mean like different category boxes you can set research in. So the first of those being primary research. So this type of research, you have to have the direct access to the data. So whether you're looking through electronic health records, whether you're going out and interviewing people to be a part of your study, you're actually collecting the data for yourself. Secondary research is normally in the form of like a systematic review. You're taking the primary research that someone else already did and you're analyzing that. So that could be they publish it in a form of a paper. They're looking to aggregate a bunch of information together. And so that type of research is a little different, and most people think of primary research when you think of it. Both types are fine, but you definitely are going to want a mentor to walk you through both types. Today, I'm going to focus mostly on primary research, but if anyone has any questions on secondary research, catch me offline and we can talk through that. Okay. All right, so what is basic research? So normally basic research is, when people think about it, they're thinking about animal experiments, some type of cell studies, the biochemical processes, things that are kind of happening inside the body or whether inside their cultures. And so there are two different types. There's a theoretical. So normally theoretical, they're testing things that we already know, whether they want to get more information about it or get better at it. So maybe testing Newton's law, whatever. You want to keep testing it over and over again, and you want to learn more about it. Or maybe we already know how a mechanism of something works, but we want to see if there are other ways to explore it. So it's kind of a theoretical. It's kind of to explore more about something we already know about. Applied is what most people, when they do research, are thinking about. So you come up with this hypothesis and you provide a solution to a given problem. So you say, hey, like I think that people who, are, medical students had to do all these things in order to get there. And so you test your hypothesis. A medical student has these characteristics. And so you're going through and you're saying, okay, you're checking these boxes to get to the final product. And then you will prove your hypothesis to be wrong, or you'll prove your hypothesis to be correct. And so that's when we think of applied, that's what most people are thinking of. So this may seem very simple. So this idea of independent variable and a dependent variable. Though this is simple, it's very important, because I can't tell you how many studies I've been on in which I tried to create this research project that had two independent variables. Two things were changing. It's hard to do a project like that because you don't know what's causing what. And so the independent variable is something that's being manipulated. And then the dependent variable is the thing that's being affected by the independent variable. And so in order for you to get an actual outcome, you have to be able to read what direction your study is going in. So for example, if you create you're looking at like the growth of a plant, right? And you change the soil and you're measuring the growth of that plant, that's great, because the dependent variable is the growth. The growth is what you're measuring, and the independent variable is what you're changing for the plant soil. If you change too many things, you won't be able to link whether it was the amount of sunlight or was it the soil that caused one or the other. So that's something that you definitely want to pay attention to as you're thinking about the type of research that you want to do and as you're developing your hypothesis. Now I want to jump into clinical research. So this is something that's really, like, I really enjoy. I think I just think it's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's really great because a lot of the research that we're starting to see now, especially with the development of vaccines, are in this idea of clinical research. And so I won't go into the different phases of a clinical trial. Just know that there are 4. And each part of that, you're thinking about the patient, and you're taking whatever you did in the basic research with the cells, the cultures, and then you're applying it on the clinical research. And so there's a field called translational and clinical research, which is basically just that. It's translating what's happening in basic research to clinical research, putting the two of them together so that you can go from a study that may have taken 5 years to develop a drug to speeding up a little bit because people came in with a clinical question and they tracked it all the way back to try to push it forward to getting to a clinical outcome. And so I want to talk about the difference between experimental and observational. So this idea of an experimental study is something that you have a control manipulating different things to looking at Tylenol or acetaminophen on pain. You may have a study in which one group would get the Tylenol and one group would not, but you would control who would get the Tylenol, who wouldn't, and you would look to see what the outcome is of the patient's pain. If you're looking at something that's observational, you aren't changing anything. So you may have patients who come in, some may take Tylenol, some may not take Tylenol, but it's not you telling them whether they can take the Tylenol or not. They do it themselves. Why is that important? Because when you're looking at a research study, it may be easier for you to hop on a study in which people are already doing what they're doing. You may be able to look at electronic health records, so the records that people, like when you go to see the doctor, your doctor's probably putting your information into some type of computer or typing that in. It may be easier for you to do an observational study because you're not changing anything that patients are doing. The patients already have what they're doing, and you're splitting them into groups and seeing what happens. And so those are the type of things to think about. Like, do you want to be a part of changing how much somebody does, or do you just want to let them do what they do and then you just see what happens? Okay, so now I want to move on to epidemiological research. So this kind of research, so I have a lot of different things up here, and so I'm going to walk through each one of them slowly because this took me a while to wrap my head around. So this study, they're normally looking at the distribution and historical changes in the frequency of diseases and the causes of them. And so for the observational studies, you can have a cohort study. So in a cohort study, you're normally looking at exposure and then following them to determine the effectiveness of the exposure on the disease outcome. So for example, if you're looking at children growing up exposed to factory fumes and seeing how they develop asthma, you identify those children first because they live close to the factory. And so you know who's gonna kind of move forward, but you don't know what the outcome is gonna be, but you know the direct exposure. So that's really great for these causal relationships between exposure and disease. And so for many of us, if you've heard this idea that correlation doesn't always mean causation. So because somebody may fit a picture, that doesn't mean that that's what caused it. And so you have to do more research to be able to answer that question. The second part is a case control. So this idea of retrospective versus prospective. So anything retrospective, at the very end who those cases are. So for example, if you took the example I gave you about asthma, which kids are going to develop that have asthma, but you don't know what the exposure is. So you don't know if it was whether they grew up in factory with fumes, did they have parents who smoked? And so basically you take what you know about the chronic disease and then work your way back based on any past exposures or the presence of the disease. And so those studies can be very helpful as well because you're kind of working your way back. But that can be a problem when it comes to causation, right? Is it smoking, their parents smoking that caused the asthma, or was it because they live close to a factory? So those are the kind of things you take into consideration. Cross-sectional studies. So were you exposed, you're measuring exposure and the outcome to the exposure at the very same time. And so a lot of the COVID-19 kind of studies that are happening right now, they're kind of happening at the same time, and we're getting data as they come. And so that's how we kind of learn about exposure tracking. And so you're saying, okay, these patients were exposed here. Let's see what happened to them as time goes on. And so cross-sectional studies can also be relatively cost-effective if you don't really know what's going on. You also can see how a different disease will present in different populations using that type of study as well. And the last one is the ecological studies. And so these studies are really looking at aggregated data. So using COVID-19 again, if you think about, how we're learning about what happened in Wuhan, China, compared to what's happening in the United States, you're looking at the entire United States, and you're looking at all of China and all of Australia. And these type of, you're defining, this geographical area of the population, and then looking to see how things develop over time in that larger group. And the last one is social sciences research. So I'm not an expert in social sciences, and I'm not going to tell you I am, but this type of medicine is really just progressing to learn more about anthropology, economics, epidemiology, geography, policy, you name it. So some important questions that may be considered social science research is, why do some patients comply with the physician's instructions while others do not? What are the most effective ways to make a patient more compliant? How does the physician make the patient comfortable in discussing embarrassing or taboo topics? And so if you have a theory about medicine and you're not sure where it fits, it may fit in the social sciences research. And so it may be a good opportunity for you to do a little more research and look into that. Okay. So almost done with the presentation, but I would be remiss if I didn't give you guys some information about how to collect that data. So quantitative data is the actual numbers. When people think about numbers, they're things that you can measure and analyze. And so 1 + 1 = 2, you can then split that and the mean is 1. Well, that was a bad example, but hope you guys get what I mean. You're observing something and then you're able to interpret those results. However, quantitative can be less generalizable. If you're looking at data across a big population of people, you may get an average, but that doesn't tell you what that individual person's story is. Compared to qualitative, you're actually doing interviews with the patient, you're gaining information about them in particular, but it's hard to take that individual patient's experience and then magnify it out to a large group. So though my personal experience in medical school may be that it's difficult, you may look at a large population of medical students who thought that medical school was easier. I'm hoping that most people don't think that, but great. So Christina said she can answer any questions about social science research. So if you have those questions, put those in the chat. Thank you, Christina. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about a project plan. So while you're thinking of your research project, you want to be thinking about what do you hope to deliver? Do you want to deliver something that that's going to be put together for an abstract? Do you want to disseminate something to members of the community because you're interested in minority research? So those type of things that you want to think about as you're approaching different things. What's the scope of the project? So what's measurable? What do you have time for? You may want to test everybody at your school for the flu, right? But if your school doesn't have the funding for that, or the principal investigator that you're working with doesn't have the funding for that, how do you tweak your project to be able to make sure that you can actually do what you want to do? And then while you're thinking about it, how do you collect that information in a costly and time-effective way? What constraints do you have? Is it time? Are you limited on resources? Do you not have a investigator that you can work with right now? So those are the type of things that you're thinking about so that you don't bite off more than you can chew. And then lastly, who's the stakeholders of this? Who can tell you that you can or can't do this? Is it your school? Is it some type of mentor that you have? Or is it yourself? Are you in school and you just can't put as much time into this as you want to? And so those are the type of things that you should be considering. Okay, so how to create a project schedule. So the things that you should be thinking about are goals. So for example, I'm hoping that most of you will, after this series, will want to apply to the Wilbur C. Jordan Research Forum. You want to put an abstract in. So once you provide those dates, I'm hoping that you'll say, okay, this is a date that I want to submit my abstract, and you'll work backwards. What are the type of things that you need to check off in order to get to that point? What does your time look like? You want to be flexible as you're going through each of these steps. You may think that your principal investigator is going to get back to you in a week. I will tell you that that is not realistic depending on if you don't know this person personally, because there will be several times where you'll have to check in regularly to make sure that they know who you are and that they didn't forget about you. So you want to also build in that additional time to make sure that if you think you can get a project done in 3 months, maybe you should add an extra 2 months in case anything goes wrong, just to make sure that you're on top of it. And then mentorship. Find a mentor. Even if it's a project that you think is easy, there are always things that you think that you know that you don't know. And I learned this the hard way. And so I'm hoping that you will gain something from this. And as we try to help mold and develop you into a researcher or somebody who has more information about research, you will also consider adding wealth from other people that you know or people that you may gain into your network a little later on based on how we help you in this series. And so I'm again hoping that all of you will come back and participate in each of the series. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of homework or goals for you to move forward to really get the most out of our next session. So one, I want you to choose an area of research. So in between the time, I want you to start thinking about what topics interest you. Are you interested in minority medicine? Okay, great. What about minority medicine? Is it high blood pressure? Is it hypertension? Are you interested in community health? How do you narrow your question down? and start to think about that, because then from there you want to start to get this project schedule, researching what type of project schedule it'll look like. So if you want to do something experimental, you may not be able to get that done really quickly because you have to recruit patients. And we'll talk about that as we work on how to develop a project. So if this is going over your head, like, just, don't panic. We're definitely going to walk through that. But I still want you to start getting something. So I want you to bring questions into this session so that you can get the most out of it. And then lastly, I want you to start researching a mentor. Again, if you're interested in minority medicine, that's great. If you're in an institution where somebody's doing minority medicine and they have a particular project that you're interested in, that's a great thing to bring into this and say, okay, great. I know that that Dr. Williams, she's doing the type of research that I'm interested in. I may not be interested in her project in particular, but maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe I can connect with her and she can help either connect me or give me more information about her particular research so that I can know what I need to in order to take the next step in my research inquisition. And then next steps. So I have a minute left, and so I apologize that this was fast, but again, I wanted to bring everybody up to speed so that our panelists have enough time to go over probably what you guys really came for. And so our very next webinar session is it's every third Thursday, same time. We'll be going over mentor-mentee relationships, and so how to get a mentor, how to cold email a mentor and get them involved. October, reading academic papers. Key. It took me years to be able to learn how to read an academic paper. So we're hoping to be able to equip you guys with some things that you need to know ahead of time so that it'll make that a little bit easier. November, how to design a research proposal, how to write it, what things should be in it. And then December, how to write an abstract and how to start or to either a large group or for yourself to write those down and to figure out, did you check off the goals that you set when you first started at the beginning of this project? Okay, so I know that was fast. So I thank all of you guys for your patience. Right now, I want to turn it over to Alex to begin to introduce our panelists. And so again, we're transitioning into the next part. So all of the questions that you guys submitted, that's when the panel is going to start to go through it. Again, they have a wealth of knowledge, as you can see all the people here. And so truly an honor to be able to have the opportunity to ask them about their research. So with that, Alex, I turn it over to you to take us to the next point.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Alex Nunnery, and I'm just going to give you guys a quick brief intro of who I am, but I am a post-bac pre-med student, and I am currently the National Pre-Med Association of MAPS. I'm the web coordinator, and I also help with diversity and inclusion, and as well as research. So yeah, without further ado, enough about me. Let's get to our amazing panel, okay? So our first panelist is going to be Dr. Akanji, and he is an associate professor at the Frank H. Netter School of Medicine. And then we have Dr. Anna Williams, and she is an associate professor at the Frank H. Netter School of Medicine. We have Mita Nija, and she is an MD PhD student at Yale School of Medicine. We have Andrew Martin. He's also an MD PhD candidate at the Rosalind Franklin University. And then we have Whitney, who obviously did the presentation, and she's also at Frank H. Netter School of Medicine, and she's an MD candidate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. What I want to do is I want to start off with just kind of having each presenter kind of talk about their story and how they got into medicine and how they got involved with research. So I want to let's start with Andrew.
Hey, everybody's doing. All right, so you said you just want us to talk a little bit about how we got here?
Yeah, and what you're doing now.
So I went to St. Louis University. I actually graduated back in 2015. I was a neuroscience major. And I started off first as biology. I knew I liked biology and psychology from high school. And so I knew going in I was going to do something with that. Found biology. Once I'm in there, I started realizing that neuroscience really is this combined together. And I ended up transferring over to neuroscience. Ended up still loving it all the way through. It was tough, but I did love it a lot and ended up finishing with that in 2015. At that point, I knew I wanted to go into science. I knew I wanted to go get a PhD, but I wasn't sure about the medicine part for a lot of the time through college. When I got to the end of it, I was pretty convinced that this is what I'm going to do, but so I needed to still take a few more classes afterwards. And so I ended up working as a lab tech for 2 years, make sure that I still really loved research after a couple of years, and it made some money. And while I was taking those courses, did my NCAT, all that stuff, handled it. And unfortunately, I didn't get in that way. Is that it didn't end up working out in my times I applied. But I ended up applying to the master's program at my university, Rosalind Franklin University, and got my biomedical science master's there. And from there, I ended up getting an interview and getting into their medical school. And my track might be a little bit different than most MD PhD students because a lot of them come in as an MD PhD student. Mine, I got accepted as an MD student, but they have a second track in my university where you can apply in your second year. And so that's exactly what I did. I ended up applying, I ended up getting it, and I'm now in a lab with a man named Dr. Peterson at my university, and it's going to be still in neuroscience. And I'm working with, I will be using viral vectors to try and reprogram glial cells in the brain and push them in their differentiation towards neurons. And all this is going to be in the context of traumatic brain injury. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. Next up, if I can have Dr. Williams.
Hi, everyone. So I have a sort of a circuitous story. It's not a clear path, and I think that that's common for a lot of people, particularly women, and particularly women of color. So I started out in college, I majored in biology. I had wanted to be a scientist. When I graduated, I got a research assistant job and realized that I was going to have to get more education if I was going to do anything what I considered interesting. As a research assistant with a bachelor's degree, there wasn't much opportunity for me to be creative or apply my knowledge. So while I was a research assistant, I happened to meet a physician assistant, a PA, and that person helped me get enthusiastic about that career, and that I ended up getting a graduate degree as a PA, and worked in the field for many, many years. Actually, yesterday was my 35th anniversary of graduation from PA school, and it's something that I'm still very proud of. But while I was working as a PA, I realized that so many of my patients' problems were driven by social and structural issues. And that no matter how much or how qualified I was to provide good medical care, it was insufficient to really help people. And I realized that I needed to round out the story with public health information. So I continued working as a PA and got my degree in public health. And then I did half and half. So I was half clinical and half public health research. And I really got the research bug at that time. I realized how fulfilling it was to have a career as a public health researcher, and also what an impact we could have in terms of changing the course of medicine and the priorities in medicine. And during that time, of course, my research interests kept changing depending on patients I encountered, but also my personal experiences. And where I finally landed and where I became a principal investigator was around issues related to cancer family caregivers, which at the time was a completely unexplored field. People were looking obviously quite a bit at individuals who had cancer, so in other words, the patients, but there was very little attention given to those who cared, the family members who cared for the patient. And so much, we now know, so much of cancer care happens at home, and that the cancer family caregiver in turn becomes a patient themselves. So that's where I devoted a fair amount of my research attention before coming to the Frank Netter School.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. That was awesome. I think that a lot of us can definitely relate to taking kind of the circuitous route to things. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and I'll have Whitney go next.
Okay, great. So like Dr. Williams said, I graduated around the same time Andrew did in 2015 from from the University of Virginia, and thought, okay, I'm ready to go to medical school, maybe, but not really. Hadn't done my MCAT, and then my grades weren't where they needed to be. And so I thought to myself, hey, I'm going to do, I don't want to do a post-bac. I'm afraid of science, but I still want to be a doctor. What can I do? And so I applied to a bunch of different programs, most of them being to help me strengthen my my GPA. And I happened to land on a clinical and translational research program at Georgetown. And in doing that, they tricked me, and I thought, okay, I will certainly have the opportunity for me to strengthen my science courses. And there was nothing like that. It was all about how to write an IRB. And so that's an institutional review board to check off so that you don't hurt a patient. And so I thought, wow, this is crazy. I literally thought I was going to be doing science. Where's the medicine behind this? And so I got matched with a mentor who was actually looking at the continuum of care for hepatitis C patients. And so I thought, hey, this is a job for me to put some food on the table. Grad school I'm broke. Let me just try this. And then from doing that, I got an opportunity to work with minority patients. She did a lot of political advocacy work. We were in DC. And so she had an opportunity to do the research that she was doing, present it to the DC health board, and then also advocate for her patients by saying, hey, there was an article that came out around that time that said that African American patients who had hepatitis C could not take 8 weeks of treatment like their white counterparts who could take 8 weeks. And so insurance companies were denying Black patients because they couldn't afford to give them 12 weeks, but they were approving white patients. And so she was a trailblazer in trying to do that. And so from then, like Dr. Williams said, I saw how important research is to medicine. And in order for you to really be effective in doing that, you have to have something on the back end to then hold up. And so from there, I came to Netter to do medicine because I was very interested in doing research as well as learning the importance of it in medicine. Right now, I'm working on at my institution, we happen to put a emphasis on research. And so we have what's called a capstone project. So my capstone project right now is looking at patient satisfaction in pediatric surgery clinics and looking to see if there are any markers that will help a patient become more satisfied. Is there a certain race associated with that? Is it how the provider treats them? Is it something that the provider says that they do? And so hoping to help make medicine more inclusive for everyone, so that patients, when they come in, they feel at home and that they can tell a provider what's actually going on with them. So if you can't tell, I am very passionate about research. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. All right, and then I'm gonna have Dr. Akanji go next.
So mute. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's nice to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I congratulate and compliment you for this initiative, and particularly Whitney for that excellent presentation that you made. I wish I had this opportunity when I was at your stage of my training. So by way of introduction, I've actually been a full professor for about 20 years now. And I was one of the first, like Professor Williams was one of the first faculty recruited into this Netter School of Medicine. My background is medical education, originally in Nigeria. Then I went to the UK, to the University of Oxford, the UK, to do my PhD and to do residency. My dissertation in the UK was on aspects of dietary fiber in the management of diabetes. That was a very, very hot topic about 30 years ago, and I think it still remains very hot. Then I came over to the US for postdoctoral training, initially at the Lexington, Kentucky, and later at the NIH. So I completed my postdoctoral training at the NIH. My research interests over this past 20 or 30 years or so have been in the general areas of diabetes, particularly the novel types of diabetes that you see in some populations, particularly minority populations. I've also been very, very interested in the intersections between diabetes and metabolics and nutrition. And metabolic syndrome is a very, very good example of that. As you know, that underlies a lot of the chronic complications that you see in diabetes, and also in very many minority populations. More recently, in the past 10 years, I've been involved in aspects of molecular endocrinology. And I went a little bit more, as a pleiotropic agent involved in very many aspects of intermediary metabolism. That remains very topical because people are still talking about vitamin D now and its usefulness, potential usefulness in the management of COVID-19 disease. So there's still a lot of story around vitamin D. So since I got to NEDA, my bench research has diminished somehow. Okay, so I'm not doing as much of it, as I used to do because of the environment at NEDA. But I've still been involved in the supervision of a lot of capstone projects. And I'm pleased that as at this point in time, I have about 3 M1 capstone students interested in aspects of vitamin D. So there's a lot that can be done through my experience and also through my interaction with colleagues around the world. And it would be nice to actually listen to you guys and see what your hopes and aspirations for research are.
Thank you so much for that. And I saw a question in the chat, and I keep seeing this question, but this recording will be posted on the SNMA YouTube channel. So if you have to leave early, it'll be there as well. And we'll make sure we try to do that for each webinar segment. All right, last but definitely not least, we're gonna have Nitin, who is a MD PhD candidate at Yale.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Hi, thank you for having me here. It's an honor. My name is Nitin, and I'm a rising 5th year MD PhD student. So I started college, I guess. I went to Cornell for undergrad, and I entered as pre-medical. And Cornell is like this huge research institution. And to kind of give a background about where I came from, so I'm a first-gen college student. My parents didn't finish high school, and so when I got into Cornell, it was like fish in water, in like dry land, I guess, not water. And I didn't actually know what research was. And so I had a work study opportunity in a research lab that like kind of incorporate research as well. This is an environmental microbiology lab. And mainly because I sucked at it. I didn't have the best mentor, and from that experience, I thought that research is not for me. I'll just stick to medicine. And then I did this pipeline program in the summer between my junior and senior year for potential pre-medical student at Weill Cornell called Travelers Fellowship. And through that, I was matched with a MD PhD who does cystic fibrosis research and asthma research. And so I was in Manhattan, and we were doing health disparity research in the Bronx in terms of asthma, asbestos exposure, and things like that. And I really got excited about the intersection between microbiology, which was and so that's also PhD program. So I was going to my senior year, and I just started researching into what an MD PhD does and what exactly is MD PhD training. So because I learned about it pretty late, like Andrew, I did not go straight through. I took 2 years off, and I did a master's of science doing bioengineering research, specifically microbial bioengineering. So I was looking at the microbiome, engineering bacteria, and things like that. And yeah, so I'm a matriculate at Yale, and right now I work in the lab of Noah Palm in the Department of Immunobiology, but I am a fan of intersectionality, and I realized that regardless of whether I'm doing basic bench work or not, my interest in health disparity spans many different fields of research. So the beautiful is long, and it also gives you an opportunity to participate in many different things and explore. Like when we're deciding which department to affiliate with or which lab to join, you actually rotate in different labs. In an epidemiology lab, and I also had some basically training in policy research. So it gives you all that exposure, and so for me, even though my PhD's training is in basic science at the intersectionality between immunology, microbiology, and neuroscience, I am also peripherally involved with epidemiology research as well as educational research. So those are my passion, driven by my identities and my background. And in terms of like research skills, I feel like research skills are very translational, and I've been able to apply skills from like epidemiology, for example, statistics, to my bench research and vice versa, things like that.
Thank you so much for those amazing intro to all of our panel. Thank you guys for being here. It's really awesome. All right, we're going to go into kind of the question portion. And during this portion, I'll definitely be directing the questions specifically just to save some time. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start. So our first question is, how did you find out about research, and what interested you about research? And what was the application process like? And so I actually want to start with Dr. Williams for this one.
So for me, it came out of clinical practice. So I had, like I said, in clinical practice, it was clear that there were some elements that you couldn't go to a textbook and look up. And you couldn't, they were just not part of the vernacular. It wasn't anything that was being addressed. And most of that related to social and structural determinants of health and the influences that they had on health, but they hadn't been encapsulated yet. This was not something that was part of the conversation in medicine. And so I wanted to get a handle on, not only get a handle on that, but also to understand how we could research it better so we could effectively intervene. So it came out of a need that I recognized in clinical practice. And I think each of the research projects that I've worked on subsequently has been related to a clinical question.
Thank you so much for that. I would also like Whitney to answer this question as well.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd pick on me. So how did I get involved in research? So I talked about how I kind of fell upon it. I think I want to change the question about why I still am interested in research. People are actually dying, I would say. And it's not, it was happening before COVID-19. That we all know that there's racism embedded and baked into every part of this country. And so when, as Dr. Williams said, I was seeing it not just clinically, and when I would say, hey, this is happening, why does it seem like patients who look like me are dying? People would say, well, where's your data behind that? What, prove it? And so from that, just thinking, well, I don't have the data. How do I get the data to then come back and say, well, look at this? And so I think that's why it's always been important for me to see, and hear something and think, well, why is it that minority patients like this, or why are there different health disparities here? And so from there, I was able to really think, to find a mentor through networking who also shared that same passion that I had. And they really helped me be able to navigate what type of research questions that I had and how to narrow them down, but also to use, like Dr. Williams said, things that I'm seeing in either like seeing patients or seeing things that are happening in the streets. How do I take that information and then put it into a research study to then try to advocate for those people who are being affected by it? And so that's how I got into research, but that's also why I want to stay into research.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that as well. All right, Dr. Akanji, if you can talk about how kind of your experience with that as well. I think you're muted. I think you're still muted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. I think this is where effective mentorship comes in. As part of my undergraduate training, we had to do research projects. These were clinical research projects. And I did a research project on the diabetic foot then. Okay, that was such a big problem. And it was so devastating in terms of its presentation, not only clinically, but also socially, because then the treatment for a lot of the patients was amputation of the legs, and that resulted in a whole range of social issues. So I got so engaged in that and got really interesting results, under the supervision of my mentor then, who felt that, look, you seem to be doing well in research, and I would like to encourage you, to develop yourself along that line. So, I cannot really say anything about my research accomplishments without going back to my mentor, because I just had this guy who was so interested in me and stood by me along the way. It was like serendipity, because if I got somebody else, I probably would not have gotten into research. But I had this incredible mentor who I still have a relationship with over 30 years, who got me into this. And this is why I'm happy that, one of the topics that we are going to talk about in this seminar series is actually getting an effective mentor. So that's how I got into research. I just got a damn good mentor.
That's so awesome. And we're so excited to have the next segment talking about mentorship. So y'all make sure you tune in for that. All right, we're going to move on to our next question. Do you need an MD, PhD to do research? Or can you just have a master's degree or a public health degree? I want to go ahead and start with some of our MD, PhD candidates. How about we start with Andrew for this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for that's always a question that people have. And one of the questions for whether or not you should go into an MD, PhD, or if you're trying to consider it. And no, especially for an MD versus an MD, PhD, an MD still can do research just without an MD, PhD. However, is that there's things down the line that why you might want to actually, if you truly want to do research going down the line, that you might want to consider actually getting the PhD portion of it. Said first of all, it's just like anything else. It's formal training. It said there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, we want to do this thing. We're so interested about this thing. Now, how do we ask the right question? Is that how do I actually, what techniques can actually get me to this answer? And this is not just for basic, but even for epidemiology, other things. There's other kind of things like asking the right question sometimes is half the battle. And really PhDs a lot of times is practice doing some of those things while learning these techniques. And then along the way, you're learning part of, unfortunately, how science is just like everything else is like figuring out how to get grants, figuring out how to get money for this lab. How can I do any of this research if I don't have anything? So it's kind of a broad range of things, which is why I think it definitely is important. But you can do it as just an MD, and I'm sure you could do it as others. I'm not sure about if you just had a master's. I'm not sure if you could be the PI of the lab, but of course you can work in a lab or be a master's student. So yes, you can do research with many different facets, but it depends on what you want to get out of it.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Dr. Akanji, can you also talk about this? Why did you decide not to get a PhD or vice versa?
I think I'm not muted. As Andrew said, you probably do not need a PhD to be able to do extremely good research. But what a PhD does is that it helps you to narrow your focus. And if you are primarily a clinician, it gives you access to basic techniques. It gives you access to the discipline of science. It gives you access to the order in science so that you can understand things like how to do a good literature review. You can be exposed to statistics and how to use statistics in your research and so on. And then you get the discipline too of orderly progress through a research project. I see that some of my colleagues who had just straight MDs will reach the destination eventually, but a lot of them struggle in the earlier parts of their career, particularly those who don't have the opportunity of doing good postdoctoral programs. So if a person is unable to get into a good organized postdoctoral program for a couple of years to get the discipline of a PhD, it might have some problem, especially if the person is contemplating a career in research. So MD, PhD is good for an academic career. It's not a requirement. It does help. And yeah, it's just the discipline and the knowledge that counts at the end of the day.
Thank you for that. And then I would like to have Meetin talk about this as well, since she is a MD PhD candidate.
Yeah, and to echo what Andrew and Dr. Akanji said, you don't need a PhD. Actually, a few medical schools now, including Columbia and Yale, have like thesis project, capstones projects. And for example, in the summer between, and you get similar training as well during your MD, though abbreviated. For example, during the summer between your first and second year here at Yale, while the MD PhD students are doing the lab rotations, MD students are actually doing the summer research. So we, as MD PhD, don't feel any different from MD or MG colleagues. And I've seen and I know MD physicians who have run their own lab, whether it is clinical, basic science, translational, public health. And I think like the culture is like, it comes down to funding. Unfortunately, like a lot of time, like in order to have your own lab and kind of define your own project, you have to have the funding. And if you do PhD training, you have that record. It is slightly easier from what I've heard with a PhD, but it's not impossible for an MD. There are MDs who have R01s, which is the big NIH funding grants. Yeah, and so definitely not possible, not impossible.
Yeah, thank you guys for clearing that up. I think for a lot of pre-meds, it's the idea of like trying to figure out if this is the right path for them specifically, if they really like research. So you guys really cleared that up and we really appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and go into our next question. So, and specifically to our students, when choosing your school/program, what did you consider and what advice would you give to students? So Whitney, I would like you to start with this one.
Sure. So I was looking for, I knew I was passionate about research and I was looking for a program, a medical school that not only also shared the same values I did of research, but I also want to go into a residency program that also has the same view. And so I applied to mostly major research institutions. Quinnipiac stole kind of caught my attention because this idea of this capstone project. And so the fact that I'm learning about how to do research and I can find a mentor as I'm walking through the different processes as a part of the curriculum is important to me. So that was the first thing, looking at the research and the curriculum. I think the second thing is I was also looking at what type of professors were there for me. And so were there a bunch of professors who only did research, and so that they would only be available to me, like, when they have time, or when, do they have to publish all of their work, and so that they're not literally at the school, they're kind of out doing their own thing. And so I think like why Netter was important to me is that 100% of our faculty, they have their research careers, but they're here and sitting on grounds 100% so that you can talk to them about anything, whether it be clinical or whether it be about their research. So I can, pre-COVID-19, I could walk in and see Dr. Akanji and Dr. Williams, ask them about their research, ask them about their clinical aspects, find out what things they think are interesting, and then make a project out of that. And so that was something that was extremely interesting to me because I want to be able to interact often with my mentors and my faculty. And so I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was perfect, Whitney. And I think that's a perfect transition into Dr. Williams kind of talking about this, since she is a professor. I would love to hear kind of her perspective on what students should be looking for.
So that's a great question. It depends on the circumstance always, right? So if you have an extended period of time and you want to do a summer research internship, say 8 weeks, we had a lot of people, a lot of students from all across the country come in to do summer internships at the Yale Prevention Research Center. In that situation, because it was they were coveted positions, there was an application process, and we had to figure out in a brief period of time, in writing and then through an interview, which of these students are we going to select? You know, in any every competitive process, I think, is flawed, and there's always bias. You have to be able to present yourself in the best light to mitigate that bias as much as you can. For me, when I was interviewing a student, I wanted to know that they weren't there just for the letter of reference. I mean, we all knew that you needed the letter of reference at the end of the summer. It's, you know, it's no secret that that's important, but we also wanted to know that you were genuinely interested in public health research. And so if you could convey that passion, then I think that really helped people catapult to the top of the list. And then the other thing is having people who were willing to do anything and everything, that really didn't want to say, oh, I only want to do analysis, or I only want to do, I don't know, some other task. Instead, having somebody who was enthusiastic about the project, had an understanding about the project as a whole. I remember hearing the saying, there's no small job, there's only small people. And so just being able to convey that you're perfectly happy doing data entry because you have a sense of what the whole project is, and you know that you're contributing in an important way to the whole project. And so therefore, you know, doing data entry now and doing it really well, and at the same time looking for ways to improve the process, to make it more efficient, or make us be able to more efficiently clean the data, or I'm trying to think of ways that students contributed. And, you know, like we definitely had students who came in and, you know, they could have just been tapping things out on the keyboard for 8 hours and going home. And instead, they contributed to making the project. So that's what we want to see when we're looking to invite students to join a research team for a summer. If someone is already a medical student and looking for a capstone project, I will say one of the most important features of a capstone project is that it can be PhD program. The best advice that I got from someone was, don't try to do the definitive study. Don't try to do the perfect study. Do the preliminary study that will give you results that you can build on. And also that you can complete in you have 5 years to complete your PhD with funding. So you want to be done in 5 years, otherwise you're subsidizing that education. And so being realistic about the project. So what can you realistically do while also being a medical student? Having a sense of feasibility and appropriateness and scale, I think, are very important for a medical student, with the understanding that eventually down the road, you'll do more with this, and that it's an initial foray into the topic.
Thank you so much for that. Meetin, I would like to get your feedback on this as well.
Yeah, so in terms of choosing school and programs, I was specifically looking for collaboration. So how do people interact with each other from different labs, and how do faculty and faculty interact, and how do grad students interact with each other? Because for me, coming from an engineering background, I knew the value of teamwork. And in terms of research, my I guess like biased opinion is that the most innovative and exciting research happens at the intersectionality of different fields. And so with that, you need to collaborate with each other. And so that also speaks to the kind of environment that you'll be doing research in. And there are certain institutions where research is more competitive. And I hate to say this, but there are some PI who would put 2 students on the same project and see who's finished first. And so like if I see an institution with that type of PI, that was an automatic no for me. So when I was speaking to PIs, as well as students, I was kind of gauging how they view other labs and also how they talk to each other as well, and whether there's a lot of collaboration. Like look at the papers from that school or that lab or that program. If the if the affiliation includes people from different departments, that's a good sign that it is a collaborative research environment.
Thank you so much for that, Meetin. That was super awesome. I'm going to move on to the next question. So what advice would you give to someone who has absolutely no experience in research? And what should they be aware of? What is acceptable? Who should they be reaching out to? And I want to go ahead and start this one with Andrew.
That's a tough question. Other than the obvious answer is like, we want to get you in some research. Is like, so you, like I talked about my path a little bit, is like that when I was coming out of undergrad to kind of trying to see if I still really loved research and to get some more experience, I became a research assistant, a research technician. Is like, and so for me, that was honestly one of the most valuable things in my life. Is like, because some of the really important things, I think that was part of the question anyways, is that really good time management, being able to multitask, and really just being able to organize yourself like on a piece of paper at least, is like, those are really big things that you learn when you come to the lab. And I'm still far from perfect at it, but my time in that lab really gave me valuable skills in not only just the techniques that I was learning, but things like that. So really, if I didn't have any experience in research and I wasn't able to get into research, the things that I'd be working on is time management skills. My able to organize, like pretend you're writing some like essay or something. How do you outline that quickly? Because that's kind of like what you have to do with research. You get all this information, but you got to kind of organize it on your paper and figure it out to actually make some sense to you later and going forward. So organize yourself like that. And getting good with multitasking, things like that. But really the best thing that I would say is do your best to try and get into a lab. Is like, reach out to your university, reach out to just anyone that's around. There's lots of people that are hiring. Is like, and if not, maybe you can get into a master's program that does something like that. Or there are lots of different summer outreach programs. I did one of those at Medical College of Wisconsin. I was part of the DSHREP program. And it was a summer, but it was like, it was good research, and they helped integrate me into everything. And it was a very good experience.
Whitney, could you talk a little bit about this as well?
Sure. So I was just thinking, what can I add to this? I think to keep it real, you can type in research opportunities, right? And they may not be what you're interested in. I think something that was valuable to me, and the panelists may or may not agree, but you want to get your foot in the door. once you get, all I need is an inch for my foot to be in the door and I can kick it down the rest of the way. So you want an opportunity, even if it's, you know, not health disparities of minority research, right? It may be something about like, you know, doing pipetting, but for you to put that on your resume and say, hey, I know how to pipette, then you can, when you cold email or someone or PI, you can say, hey, I know how to do this. And then they may say, okay, well, I have a project that's like this. And so you keep adding things on your belt, the more you get down until eventually you may get to that project you really like. Also, you never know who someone else may know. So you may be doing research with somebody and it may not be the most interesting research, but you know, just by saying that you know them in another setting that you're in will help you connect with other networks. And so I would just say that keep your networks broad. You may want to do public health research, but that MP, that PhD or MD PhD professor that's at your school who can help plug you into different people that he went to school with, and they can then plug you into more people. You just want to grow your network. And that's so important, because I can't begin to tell you how many doors opened up for me just because I started with somebody who I thought had, you know, didn't know anybody or didn't have any type of information that I thought would be helpful for me. And they opened a door to someone else that I never would have saw coming if I didn't try.
Thank you so much for that, Whitney. I totally agree. Dr. Akanji, could you talk a little bit about kind of what it's like from the PI side of things?
I'll just follow up on what Whitney said. You know, from my experience, you know, there are two groups of students, you know, coming up to me, you know, for advice on their research. There's some who want to be part of a team or are already part of a team or want me to introduce them to some colleague, you know, somewhere in the country doing the kind of research that they're interested in. I mean, that's fair, but I tell them about the limitations of being part of a team. If you're one of 20 people, for instance, and you have PhD students in the group, you have postdocs in the group, all of you are struggling for attention. So if you are just like pipetting, only pipetting, for instance, or helping to weigh the rats and so on, you might not get, you know, positioned well enough, you know, to have some recognition for that project. And when I'm evaluating students at the end of their capstone projects, I really want them to tell me how effective they were in that project. Okay, what exactly did they do? What was the nature of their contribution to that project? And as you know, when you're submitting papers to journals for publications now, you got to indicate exactly, you know, what your role is in that project. So that has to be a consideration in the sort of projects that I advise my mentees to go into. The other group of students that I have are those who want to do a project within the setting of the school. And as we've all been saying, you know, the problem for a lot of our students is not aptitude. I mean, having interviewed scores of students coming into medical school, I know that they're extremely superbly talented. So they can do it, you know, I have no problems with that. What I think a lot of people struggle with is I think Professor Williams mentioned it, but I will summarize it as realistic adventurism. You know, people come with really, really grand ideas of what they want to do because of a lack of knowledge of the realities of their situation. There's so many things around research, funding, facilities, and so on that really matter. So when you come for a really novel project, you know, that's fine, but are you able to do it within the time that you have? I also look for passion in the students and hard work. I want my students to be very passionate. They may not know the subject ab initio. I'm sure they will learn because they have the aptitude, but they've got to work hard. They've got to be passionate so that if I have a session with them on a Monday, for instance, and a paper came out in the New England Journal of Medicine the previous Friday on that subject, I want them to have read it because I probably would have. So if I see that kind of student on a Monday or Tuesday, and the student is not aware of that paper, I kind of feel a little discouraged. So what I want in my students, you know, coming to me for mentoring is, again, that realism, you know, passion for the subject, a lot of hard work, and also a dose of broad-mindedness. You know, I don't want students to be closed-minded, you know, to say that, oh, this is it, this is what I have to do, and it has to be done only this way. I mean, we can always negotiate on these points, but I would like students to be as open-minded as possible.
Yeah, that's really true and really important. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Thank you guys so much for being here and just killing it with these questions. Okay, so in your opinion, what type of characteristics or attributes make a student a great fit for a research position? And what can a student that's trying to get a research position, what can they do to stand out?
I can start. So I can't. I'm just a MD candidate, right? So I'm not a professor or anything like that. But what I can say in my personal experience of being on a research team and watching my mentor weed through things. So something that Dr. Akanji said that really stuck with me, this idea of passion, right? And so I know for me in clinical research, my mentor literally sat down and had a couple of check boxes she wanted me to fill. One, she told me to be in clinical research, you have to always be thinking about the patient. If you're thinking about the methodology, how the project's going to work, is it going to hurt the patient at all? What is the patient going to gain from that? So she was looking for somebody who was always thinking about the patient, but also thinking about what the patient's going to gain from it. Are we going to present the research to them? Or how are we going to get this information back into the community? She wanted me to think about these type of things before. Even if I had no idea about research, she wanted me to have some type of thought process on how to work through those things. And so if you have some ideas or you think that you know some steps, or you've been in a doctor's office and you think that there's some things that can be done better, and you can apply that when you're talking to someone, I think that you would be great for clinical medicine, because that's what happens. Also, the second thing is, the realest thing I can say is fake it until you make it. So you being passionate about it, even if you don't like what Dr. Akanji has going on, has his project, Dr. Akanji should feel like that is the most important topic in the world to you. You may go home after that and say, phew, but Dr. Akanji shouldn't know that. You should be putting in 100% every time that you were with him, because again, that impression that he has of you will take you to the next step. And so I think someone who understands that understands that networking is a game. And so you want every person that comes into contact with you to have a good impression of you. I think that if you understand that concept and can work hard, you will go far despite whatever obstacle that you may have, and despite whatever you not having any background in research, because I think those are the two most important things that help propel me into my kind of career I've created in medical research.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Whitney. Dr. Williams, can you talk about this a little bit?
Sure. I think it's in terms of characteristics that students should have, definitely being organized. I can tell you that many students come into my office to talk about research ideas, and they won't have done the background research. They won't be able to say, this is what the field looks like at this time. So I think it's great to have ideas. That's the first step. But then before you talk to somebody about your research to build the project, you need to do your homework. You need to research what else has been done on this topic, and where are the voids, where are the strengths in the research, what still needs to be done, and show that you have an understanding of that field. I think that's the first thing, the doing the due diligence, being organized, being able to come back and synthesize what you've read. So, and that's something that's a skill that you can start building as an undergraduate. I know there's a fair number of undergraduates on the call. So from now, as you're writing term papers, you should be building that skill of synthesizing disparate sources into a coherent story. Because really that's what grant writing is. It's storytelling. That's what dissemination of your research once it's completed in the form of a manuscript. That's more storytelling. You're saying this is where we began. This is the backstory. This is what we want to accomplish. This is how we did it. And this is what we found. And it has to be a coherent narrative. So building that skill set in whatever form will definitely be helpful to you.
Right. Yeah, I want to be super mindful of everybody's time. And I'm going to try to get in like 2 more questions before we end. So I wanted to ask, how much time should a student be allocating to research? And what does that look like when you are a part of the lab and also trying to balance your daily school activities? Let's start with Andrew.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. So for me, I guess I have to say from the MD aspect is like, that's definitely a big one. And for me, my M1 year, I really wasn't doing research. It was like, for the most part, I was mostly trying to figure out what labs are, getting in contact with some of the PIs, getting to know some of the people, and talking to other MD PhDs on the way as I'm trying to sort through these things. Really, for me, a lot of my research was done during the M1 to M2 summer. Is like I tried to get in as much as I could over that summertime. And then when I came back in my M2 year, then we have classes again. Is like, and that is important to still do well in those. And so I really wasn't doing much than a few hours each day. And if I couldn't get in that day, then I would try and make it up on a weekend. It's like I made it work where I could, but for the most part, I felt that for me, I had kept it limited during the weeks as like trying to make sure that I was doing my stuff. But then I tried to do as much as I could over the summertime. It was like, that's when you have this time, get it done so you can still do your work during the school year. And then during the actual PhD portion, it's a bit different. Is like, so for that, there's time to do research. So it's different in that sense.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Meetin, can you talk about this a little bit as well?
Yeah, so we specifically discourage specifically the MD PhD from doing research during the school year, even though there are exceptions, because med school is in itself a beast. And you really want to dedicate your full time to it, especially you can't do both bench research and med school at the same time. So we do it during the summer, as Andrew said, and then the PhD. But for MD students, they're during the summer, but also there are a lot of students take a 5th year. So basically a year between the 3rd and 4th year to do research. At Yale, that is funded. And you can do like research as part of an MPH or an MPA as well. Yeah, so in terms of like during med school, you can like, if you're doing clinical or bioinformatics research, you can squeeze it in there. I've seen that successfully done because you can be anywhere, it's flexible. Basic science bench work, it's because in order to be productive in bench, you need to like a big chunk of your time dedicated to it to be productive. So it's harder to incorporate that in addition to classes. And for undergrads, for those undergrads here, I would say that like balance it out, depends on the semester. If you can take research for credit, definitely do it. Like 20 hours per week. I think if you're aiming for like MD PhD programs, and knowing that like also recognizing that if you do spend a lot of time in research in the lab, that there's going to be some balance with your grades. And so if you look at the average GPA, for example, for MD PhD students versus MD students, MD PhD students have lower average GPA compared to MD students. And there's a reason why, because we're all lab rats. And so do recognize that there is that balance because we're not all superhuman. And programs do recognize that. as well. Yeah.
And Dr. Kanji, could you give us some feedback on this?
Yeah, I think I'm going to rely on the judgment of Andrew and Mitchen on this because they are really on the field. But what I advise my students, on capstone projects is this: we don't have an MD PhD program in my institution. Is that the didactics, their block exams are their priorities. They got to pass their block exams and they got to pass their end of clerkship exams. Now, they should create some time in between. Okay, like between M1 and M2 when they have the full, they have capstone blocks during the clerkship years. Where the sophistication and the intensity of the project comes. Because there's really no point having an elegant project, which at the end of the day produces no outcome. All right, so I sit down with the students, look at the time implications for what they are doing, prioritize their block exams and their clerkship exams, and tell them to get everything done within 4 years. If I have a student who can complete the capstone project within a year, that's great. Then the student has the rest of the 3 years to do whatever he or she wants to do. But I just tell them that their priority, as far as I am concerned, is completing the didactic requirements. And then capstone should just be an appendage to that.
All right, thank you guys so much. I want to thank our panel for being here. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but if you guys have questions, we're going to put up an email at the end that you can send questions to. And once again, we will be going more in depth on specific items as we go through the segment. So if you guys have questions for upcoming segments, just let us know as well through that email. And then also we want to ask you guys to make sure that you take our survey. All you have to do is take a picture of this QR code. We want your feedback because we want to know how we're doing. Once again, I want to thank our panelists so much for being here, for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here. And before we end, I would like to just have our panelists just kind of say a couple final words of just a little bit of advice to students. Just with everything going on in the world, I would love to hear just a little feedback on like kind of what we should be doing and how we should be moving forward. And so let's just start with Whitney and then we'll just move all the way down to Meetin. So Whitney, if you can.
So it's not research related, but I think for everyone who's in school or working towards something with the times, just keep working. I'm sending you love and prayers to you. And if there's anything that I can do to help you in your quest, or whether you're working to network or looking for a mentor, I'm happy to offer myself to you. So just keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you for that. Dr. Ikanji.
Well, I think the priority now is to stay safe and keep well. Every other thing will fall into place later on.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I would agree with what's been said already. And the only thing I would add is to be kind to yourself, to understand that we all have limitations, and that you're doing the best that you can under these circumstances. And when you're feeling isolated, make sure to reach out to someone. Don't stay in that isolated state for too long.
So thank you so much for that. Andrew?
Yeah, I definitely have to echo what everybody's saying. It's very good advice. And then along with that, I think for your particular journeys is like, I think you've heard from everybody. I think we've all taken some kind of roundabout path here. It doesn't matter what it looks like. Believe in yourself, keep moving, and things will fall into place. Just keep pushing at it.
And last but definitely not least, Meetin.
I'm gonna echo everyone here, but also like to be gentle to yourself. And these are hard times. You're not going to be as productive as you used to be. What is productivity anymore? And to really like also be proactive when you feel like it. And like a no is not a no to you, but it's more of an external thing. So just definitely just keep reaching out. And yeah, and research is hard in general for everyone. And so be gentle to yourself.
All right, I want to remind you guys of our upcoming webinars, and make sure you guys go and take a screenshot of this. Obviously, on social media, we'll be promoting our upcoming webinars, and as we have more panelists, you guys will definitely know about that. We'll keep you in the loop. I want to put out a plug for the SNMA. If you're not an SNMA member, we would love to join you. I mean, the SMA has provided such great opportunities for obviously webinars like this and a lot of other great segments. So just be sure to make sure you follow the SMA, make sure you join. And then from the diversity committee, from me, Whitney, Melissa, and everyone else that's a part of the diversity committee, we would love to have you join the diversity committee, be a part of our projects that we have going on. And we would love to see you guys at the next webinar. And that's all we pretty much have. Thank you guys once again so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.